Hello everyone, and welcome to another video from Eagles of Empire Miniatures. In today's video we are going to dive into a first off of a new series of unit analysis. So these are going to be kind of a unit video podcast where we dive into the historical background for a unit. We'll look at the unit's stats and unit card, and we'll look closer at potential heroes you can attach to the unit to really boost the ability of this particular unit in the gameplay. So it will be a mix of looking at history and how the gaming unit works and dynamics combined with that gaming unit when playing a skirmish game of Eagles of Empire. So in today's first episode we're gonna jump on into French Cuirassiers. So let's have a closer look at the French Cuirassiers. The history of the Cuirassiers and the special body armor actually dates back to the medieval period, where you would have the traditional knights with all their breastplates and helmets and arm protection, and that would fast become obsolete in the Renaissance period, where firearms became more and more dominant on the battlefields, and the body armor would just basically slow riders down and put them in danger rather than protecting them. So there was a decrease in body armor during the Renaissance period, and that spilled over into the 17th century. The major conflict there being the 30 Years' War, where you see a rapid decline of the body armament, especially on some of the mid-level cavalry, but you'll still see cuirassiers wearing helmets, what looked like a knightly armor, but only being protected on the thighs and the shoulders and the main torso. Later on in the 17th century, when we come up to the wars of Louis XIV, you would see a further decreasement in the armament. Especially here you have, we're getting closer to what we would call a cuirassier, traditional cuirassier unit, where you have riders with the breastplate and the backplate, and they would be wearing a bicorn hat in combination with that. And that really continues up through the 18th century, main conflict mid-18th century being the 7 Years' War, with some of the legendary cuirassiers unit of Frederick the Great, and also the French cavalry of that period. You see a lot of beautiful cuirassiers unit there. And we go up to the Napoleonic War, end of 18th century, beginning of 19th century, where we really see the foundation of the lore and the legend regarding the French Cuirassiers, probably most well known for their charge at Waterloo, where they charged the British infantry formed up in squares. Really iconic battle and iconic scene for the French Cuirassiers. So coming up to the end of the 19th century, namely the Franco-Prussian War, these cuirassiers, the French Cuirassiers, would be armed and would be uniformed very close to what you would see under Napoleon I and the Napoleonic Wars, because the Third Empire, Napoleon III, really wanted to play on all the sentiments and the tradition and all the lore and energy that was connected to his uncle's greatness. So looking at the uniforms, they're very close to what you would see, small tweaks, but generally speaking, very close to the Napoleonic Wars. And of course, this was it was becoming very obsolete. We are in the end of the 19th century. Rifle fire has become very precise, rapid fire is possible, and being on horseback would just make you a large target, really. And a breastplate would not protect you in this case. That would be in case of cavalry melee, and it could in some degree protect you from blows with a sword perhaps, but that is all reflected when we go closer to look at the unit stats. I'll go into that again. So yeah, I mean, in the Franco-Prussian War, the French Cuirassiers, beautiful unit, beautiful regiments, really legendary and morale boosting for the army to see these guys. It must have been an amazing sight when they charged at the Battle of Wörth one of the beginning battles in the Franco-Prussian War, still during the imperial period of the war, meaning that the period of the war where the emperor was actually still in power. He got deposed after Sedan, or he abdicated, and the government collapsed and went into a republican phase. So in the beginning here, during the Battle of Wörth, MacMahon was faced with an enormous Prussian army attacking him, and he was basically getting crushed on his flanks. He needed to extract his army away from the battlefield to save what he could save. So he deployed the cavalry reserve and sacrificed 6 Cuirassiers regiments, full regiments. 6 out of 10 regiments got sacrificed in one afternoon, basically shot to pieces during a series of defensive charges made through incredibly poor terrain into Prussian rifle muscles, and they just shot them into absolute smithereens. There was a story that one of the French officers leading a regiment of Cuirassiers raised his saber and shouted to charge, and in the moment that he raised his saber and made the cry for the charge, a Prussian cannonball just picked his head right off. So the regiment was kind of they were not too keen on doing that charge, but eventually made spurred the horses and went for it. Yeah, so 6 regiments of French Cuirassiers lost in one afternoon during the Battle of Wörth in early August of 1870. That really hurt the French morale, I think, most of all, but also, of course, the French cavalry capacity on the heavy side was somewhat decimated after this particular battle. So that is some of the history surrounding this particular unit. I mean, they're fantastically fun to paint. There's so much, beautiful uniform and dash attached to this unit. I think the combination with the breastplate still adds a lot of feeling and legend to them. So beautiful unit to paint, and an absolutely must-have if you're painting French imperial army for the Franco-Prussian War. To some extent, the cavalry was still used in the Republican phase later on, but much less than in the imperial phase, and they would be used mainly for scouting missions, which would be the correct way to use them, in my opinion. Right, so let's jump over and have a look at the unit stats for this particular unit. Okay, so here we go. You have the French Cuirassier unit card that comes when you buy a set of French Cuirassiers from the range. You'll get a French Cuirassier unit card that goes along with it, so you can see the stats for playing with this unit in the game. And let's start in the top right corner. You see there's a 6, and that means it costs 6 command points to recruit this unit. A basic unit of infantry would set you back 3 command points, so this is about double that cost. It is it's not a cheap unit to recruit, but if you play it right, it can really pack a punch, and it can also take some damage in, especially if it ends up in cavalry melee. I would not put this unit up against infantry in a face-to-face charge. That is very risky, especially because at this point in history, the rifle fire had quite a long range, so they would take 1 to 2 direct hits of rifle fire before they were able to close down with the enemy, so that cannot be recommended. Movement rate, well, they have 16-inch movement rate. Infantry in the game has 6 to 8 inches, depending on which kind of infantry it is. So it again is a good unit to get mobility on the map. It's a unit that could easily be kind of a backline stopper. Say you would push forward with your main force, and you would still have some tactical objectives in your backyard that you'd like to defend because of the income. French Cuirassiers could be a good backstopper for that. They would certainly be able to pick off small decimated enemy units that break through your line and go down for a deep disruptive action in your backyard, trying to pick off some of your tactical objectives. The French Cuirassiers could be a good stopper for that. Yeah, so charge value, 4d6s, which is, you know, way beyond standard. They are packing quite a punch. And 2 defensive die, which is standard for any unit in the game, and a unit strength of 3, which is also standard for any unit in the game besides artillery. So just looking at the stats straight up, I would say it's a very mobile unit with a lot of attacking power, and it has, of course, the ability in the bottom. You have special abilities. The little sniper sight there means it's a large unit. All cavalry is deemed large units, which basically means it suffers a penalty when shot at. The unit shooting at this cavalry would gain an additional fire die when rolling to hit. The icon to the right of it, the icon that looks kind of like a shield or a coin or something like that, well, that is the cuirass protection, and it means the unit will gain a 2d6 defense die in cavalry melee. So you roll 2 extra dice when rolling in a cavalry melee for defense. Now this can be really useful if you have like big melees going on in the battlefield where the enemy has thrown in a few units against you, and some of those enemy units might be cavalry. Well, you can just throw your cuirassiers right in there and you'll add 4 defensive dice to that. That is really interesting because remember that in Eagles of Empire, excess saves that you make as the defender would jump right over and become unsavable casualties at the attacker. So that is that's a pretty powerful 4 extra dice you can put in there in a melee. Right. So oh yeah, and another thing to mention here when looking at cavalry is, of course, that there is a rule called charged by cavalry, which means that infantry or artillery units that is charged by cavalry will have to take an immediate moral test on a d6. They roll for 4+, and if they don't get past the moral test, they will lose a unit strength to trampling and panic in the ranks. So cavalry can still, even in this late age for the cavalry, they can still, of course, do a lot of impact and damage if they make it to the enemy. But again, rifle fire or potentially artillery fire would probably decimate the unit before you make it there. So yeah, try to really, I would recommend playing these really with both eyes open, and probably a more defensive unit than offensive unit for sure. Yeah, and they do have an interesting extension. They do have an interesting hero to be added to the rank, and let's have a look at him. Right, so when looking at the hero you can attach to a unit of cuirassiers, we have General de Bonmain. Bonmain was the general who was tasked with making the horrible sacrificial attack at the Battle of Wörth that I mentioned earlier, where France lost several regiments of their cuirassiers to rifle fire from the Prussians. Some of the units not even making it to the enemy at all, just getting shot to pieces before really getting out of the get-go. So General de Bonmain can be attached to a unit of French Cuirassiers, and he costs 4 command points to recruit. And what will you get for those 4 command points? Well, you'll get his special ability called Sacrifié, meaning sacrificed. So Bonmain sacrificed his cuirassiers at Wörth in order to protect the retreating French infantry. As long as Bonmain is on the table, all French infantry will have 1 extra d6 in defensive value. So that means all French infantry squads, normally saving on 2d6, will have an additional d6 per squad. That's pretty strong. You can attach bowmen to your cuirassiers. You can keep them defensive, keep them as this line stopper way back, just kind of mopping up any enemy units that might be trying to flank you, might be trying to go to your backyard and pick off some of your tactical objectives. That might be a strong combination to boost your cuirassiers and boost the infantry fighting the Prussians up at the very front. So if you want to be a little more gamey, you can do it like that, but you have to remember losing the unit of cuirassiers that General Bonneman is attached to also means that General Bonneman will die with that unit. He will live and die and fight with that unit. So again, worth mentioning that it could be a good idea to play these cuirassiers a little more defensive. That said, well, they are cuirassiers, and there's nothing like a good cavalry charge and a dash into legend. So if you feel like it, you can always try to pounce on your enemy and see if you can surprise him by dash and just the sheer hit when they trample down on his units. So yeah, that kind of wraps it up of this particular unit analysis. French Cuirassiers, wonderful miniatures to paint, historical unit with lots of legend and I think historical feeling over them. You need to have these in your ranks if you want to have a real French army for the Franco-Prussian War. That's one thing that's for sure. How you use them, well, up to you. I've used them in games where they got shot to pieces. I've used them in games where they really played a huge part in protecting tactical objectives very successfully. So yeah, you heard my opinion here regarding how to play them, but there's probably many other ways to do that. But I'd love to hear some of your opinion if you've played a game of Eagles of Empire and you've used the cuirassiers. You know, just drop some comments below and tell me your experience of using this gaming unit. And yeah, that's it from me. Wish you all a good day, and I hope you get some good games in there out with your mates, and have a good one. Bye bye.